going to go over here. Okay, so video games and art. And we're talking about this. So obviously, video games and art are related in some ways, but they're also distinct things. And there's kind of an interesting history between, the medium of games and the art world. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. But the main reason I like to talk about this is because a lot of artists have created games that are kind of different than, normal mainstream commercial games, and I think some of those differences are interesting to see and talk about. So that's what we're going to be doing today. This is an image of the Last Supper, where all the people from that painting were replaced by video game characters, which is kind of a good joke to start on. Okay, so this is a quote from a collection that the MoMA did, I think in like maybe 2013. Let's see, when was this? 2012. So they made this collection of video games, and this was kind of interesting because the MoMA is obviously one of the big art institutions in New York and in the world. They've shown a lot of important modern art over the years. And for a long time, video games were kind of considered commercial and not really art or whatever. Sort of the same way that comic books or other pop media might be considered. And maybe that doesn't really matter. It might not really matter at all what the art world thinks of video games. But it does set sort of the concept or the way that people perceive art in popular culture. So it's interesting that in more recent efforts have been made by institutions like the MoMA to kind of interface or interact with the video game world. One thing. So this is a quote from the curator's statement from this exhibition. Says, "Are video games art? They sure are, but they are also design, and a design approach is what we chose for this new foray into this universe. The games are selected as outstanding examples of interaction design, a field that MoMA has already explored and collected extensively, and one of the most important and oft discussed expressions of contemporary design creativity. Our criteria, therefore, emphasize not only the visual quality and aesthetic experience of each game, but also the many other aspects, from the elegance of the code to the design of the player's behavior, that pertain to interaction design." So I think this is, it's kind of interesting. They're kind of like saying that video games are art, but they're also saying that we're not thinking of them as art. We're thinking of them as design. And you could argue about what's the difference between art and design. They're both sort of very broad terms that can be interpreted to mean a lot of different things. But generally, we can think of design. One difference between design and art is the idea of communication. Design is intended to communicate an idea clearly. We see that in advertising, signage, like highway signs, subway signs, things like that. The goal of design is to communicate clearly. The goal of art may be something slightly different. It may communicate things in a more ambiguous or metaphorical way. And so I think that's kind of an interesting lens to think about this, whether games have more sort of meaning to think about than what their basic design presents us with. And I would argue that they do. The games that are collected in this collection are a lot of mostly pretty famous games, some more obscure games. But even a game like Pac-Man, it's a pretty simple interface, pretty simple design. It's very effective as a video game. And I think considering it as design maybe allows us to not think about or not consider what the more significant meaning behind a work like this might be. And you don't necessarily have to do that. It's not required to appreciate a video game to understand the meaning behind it. But I think it's interesting that the way that this is framed is telling us that that's not the way that we should be considering it. So let's look at some games that are kind of playing with this idea. So the first series of games that we'll look at fall into this category called art games. And there's a few different types of categories of how these things that, how we can consider these things. And so when I say art games, what I mean basically here are games that are intended to be artistic experiences that are interactive. So they act like games, but they may not have traditional gameplay or game design techniques. So a really early version or example of this is Alien Garden by Jaron Lanier. And Jaron Lanier, you've probably maybe heard his name before. He's most famous for being considered like the inventor of virtual reality, and he's become kind of an interesting thinker in terms of modern technology and media and stuff like that. But before all of that, he was making these kind of cool art games. So let's watch a little bit of this one. Are you guys able to hear the sound on this?
Yes.
Yes, we are.
Cool. Let's skip ahead a little bit. This is still the title. Okay, here we go. So from this short excerpt, we can kind of see what makes this game different than what we might expect from a video game of this era. So, games at this time like Pong or Tetris or Mario or things like that, there's always like a very clear goal and a clear scoring mechanism. You have like points and levels and things like that because that helps the player understand what they're supposed to be doing. In this game, there's no points, there's no levels, it's not really clear what the goal of the game is. But there's actually an aesthetic goal. So you control this character and you can sort of eat these components of these, flowers or plants or however you want to think of them. And then they regrow in different ways. So the ultimate sort of change or goal is creating this different aesthetic experience. So this game uses the interaction of games. It uses the aesthetics of games, the sound of games. But it has a slightly different take on what the sort of goal or experience of a game could be.
Was that for IMAX Sinclair?
I think this was for Atari. Let's see. Alien.
I think I had that for the Timex Sinclair, which is
Oh,
real.
really?
Yeah. You used to load up the video games on actual audio cassettes.
Oh, really? A Timex Sinclair. How do you spell that? Sinclair?
Timex like the watch. T's and Tom, I's and Indigo. M as in Martha.
Okay.
EX. Sinclair. SIN.
Oh, yeah.
CLIR.
Yeah, it's from the same era, so that kind of makes sense. Maybe they had a cartridge for both Atari and for this guy. That's cool. I'll have to look into that. Yeah.
I have it. I'm using it to type up all my papers for all my other classes.
Cool. Nice. So this is another Jaron Lanier game from a year later called Moondust. This was for the Commodore 64. So you may have been able to kind of get the sense from watching just that quick example, but this game is almost like a musical composition system where the physics of the game are actually creating the composition of the music that we hear. And so, other than being like a technologist and a developer, Jaron Lanier is also a prolific musician. He has like a million instruments, and he knows how to play a lot of different stuff. And I think that practice is, informed his approach to games like this. So another work from around this time, Lorna by Lynn Hirschman Leeson, who's a filmmaker. This was actually using a different technology. I forget. I think it was like a laser disc with a menu where you could choose different chapters. And so in this narrative, there's a protagonist, but you can actually choose the ending that the protagonist does. So it's really just like a video.
Now, you might say that Lorna was controlled remotely, not only by her own access, but by the participants who were able to use their own remote switch to choose what they wanted to see or to hear. For instance, if they chose their telephone, they could select one of several channels and therefore get different interpretations of what was said. The piece had 3 endings. Lorna could either commit suicide, shoot her television set, or what some people consider the worst option of all, move to Los Angeles. When I was making Lorna, it occurred to me that here we are in the communications revolution, and people have never been more alienated or more lonely.
So Lorna was using the technology of the time to create this interactive experience. Another similar experiment, or sort of experimental piece, is "Afternoon: A Story" by the author Michael Joyce, and this is sort of a early interactive fiction. So you can click on different words to go to different chapters and different parts of the narrative. And so a lot of these early experiments are, people who work in traditional mediums like writing or film using newly available technologies to make interactive experiences. And with those experiences, you have, game-like mechanics that are added in. So this is jumping up a bit, but another example, I don't know if this is still going to work. It worked last time I tried it. Let's see. It may take a second to load. Let's see if there's any errors. Please allow 70 seconds. Okay, so I'll talk about this a little bit. Hopefully it'll load and we'll get to see it. But this is a game that was created by a duo, an artist duo, Thompson and Craighead. And they made a lot of like internet art and different things like that. This was like the first piece that they made that kind of uses this game aesthetic. Obviously, it's based on Space Invaders. But in this game, instead of shooting aliens, it's shooting a sort of postmodern critical text that talks about the death of the author. And so it's sort of a joke. It is interactive. If it actually loads, we'll see that it works. But we may have to come back. Let's see. I think an error. Let's check out the. And maybe it doesn't. Need this stuff. Okay, let's come back in a second and see if it's running. All right. Another game from around this time, SOD by the digital art collective Jody. So this again is a collective, it's a couple of people. They created this game by taking a popular video game, Wolfenstein, and deleting all of the art assets from the game and just leaving the basic sort of building blocks of the game in place. And so this becomes, it's still a playable game, but it's impossible to interpret the meaning of the different sprites. And so we're left with this kind of like structural, empty version of what's happening in the game. We have these like basic geometric elements instead of, the characters that represent different things. Also reveals a little bit about how the game environment is created, since we can see all of these billboard textures. And so this game existed before we had fast enough graphics to do sophisticated 3D stuff. And so the way that they imitated 3D is by placing flat images in different locations and using this kind of billboard effect. Let's go back here and see if this is... Okay. All right. Another game from around this era. This is just a video documentation, so we can't play it anymore, but this is a sort of short story, The Intruder, which is a short story by an author named Borges, who you guys might be familiar with.
The Intruder.
In this game, a lot of different game mechanisms, like we can see Pong being used here, are used in conjunction with the actual text of the story to create this sort of interactive experience of the literature. And you can see how some of this may, kind of influenced a lot of the indie games that we looked at last week.
People say, but it is unlikely, that the story was first told by Eduardo, the younger of the Nilssons, at the wake of his elder brother Christian, who died in his sleep sometime back. They were called the Nilssons. The rambling old house was of unplastered brick. Returning home with a girl he had picked up along the way, but after a few days he threw her out. He took to drink. The arrangement went well for several weeks, but it could not last. Tried to take up their old life of man among men. They went back. Christian said to him, "We have to leave some hides off at Pardo's place. I have already loaded."
So it's kind of juxtaposing this new medium of games with those sort of narrative, with the narrative of the story, kind of showing how different parts of that story explored in this different medium feel and look very different. Another early art game. This one is called Mario Battle No One. So number one is sort of a pun on no one. There's no one in the game. So
in the year 2000, the year Nintendo applied for...
In this game, the artist has basically just removed all of the elements from Mario game world other than Mario himself. So it just becomes a walking simulator, sort of like the ones we looked at last week in the indie games.
Mario becomes the user's avatar, walking aimlessly through the digital landscape. A solitary mission without an obvious goal, saved as Mario Battle Number 1 or Mario Battle No One. As there is no Capture Princess Peach toadstool, no need for heroism, no monetary prizes, no amphetamines to make you stronger, there is nothing left to do but go for a walk, run, or jump around, solitary in the landscape, and then you run out of time and die.
So that's kind of a funny commentary on game systems and creating a game that removes the basic goals. So moving forward a little bit, this is a game called Facade, and this was a very sort of innovative game at the time. It kind of looks weird now, but this was a fully AI-based game, so you could write whatever you wanted into the text interface, and the characters in the game would respond to you. And it's sort of this like performance. It's almost like a theater piece where you're kind of coming over to this couple's house for a dinner, and they're having this fight, and then you get involved in it. And so they actually react to what you say, and the game kind of like incorporates anything that you say into the overall narrative. So it looks pretty janky now, but I remember when this came out in 2005, it was like this very innovative experience.
Andrew! I'm so happy you could make it. We haven't seen you in so long. How's it going, man? Oh, we're great. I mean, really, really great. Come on in!
Andrew? Hi, how are you? Oh, it's so nice to see you. It feels like it's been forever.
Yeah, how are you doing?
I just asked him that.
Well, I can ask him too.
Oh. And I've got to say, you look really good.
So it kind of continues from there. I think you can still play this game. I think you can still find versions of it that are emulated. So then another game from around this time, this is by a game developer named Rod Humble. And his kind of like approach to games is to take away all this sort of signifiers, similar to the Mario Battle No One. But in this case, he's leaving all the game mechanics, but taking out the textures, the things that imply, time and place and setting and things like that. And so it's just leaving the basic gameplay mechanics. So this is a game called The Marriage. And the way that the game works is you have different shapes that you can kind of interpret to, represent different things. And they have these kind of ambiguous interactions. And so it's sort of a simulation game in a sense. And you can kind of watch as the game unfolds. And there's just very, very basic changes and updates to the game state. You can see the blue square, when it gets hit by a green circle, it will eat the green circle and get larger. And the user can also get rid of these circles. And when the blue square and the pink square hit each other, the pink square gets larger. And over time, there are changes to the environment and things develop. So sort of a slow process. And, it's kind of meant to be a, sort of meditative aesthetic experience that uses the mechanics of a game world. Another game by a game developer I like a lot, Jason Nelson, who's still creating games. This one is called Game, and again, Game. And so he uses, again, game mechanics, but he adds in a lot of different sources. He uses these kind of like goofy drawings and a lot of like quotations and different things like that to to add sort of different meanings into the game experience. His old games are all Flash games, so they may not run unless I have a Flash emulator installed. Let me see. So click here. Oh, here it is.
Come on and meet your maker.
So I really like how his work uses the interactivity and sort of mechanics of games, but uses a lot of different types of aesthetics to create a poetic and visual experience. So another art game, Pop Methodology Experiment 1. So this is more of a video art piece, but it has interactive components in it.
I can tell you everything you need to know about the game.
Once inside the arcade world,
you actually control the game with keyboards and mice.
And one thing you can do is
hitting the keyboard.
Press
C A
and
arrow keys.
Okay, so far so good.
So rather than relying on a keyboard,
We need to
use the mouse.
When we said reality will never be the same, we weren't kidding.
We've given you all you really need to know to fool and video game.
And so they join the stream of family life in the suburbs.
All right, let's get to play the game.
This is RP-622 with a contact. This is RP-622 with a contact. How copy forward? RP-622, this is what contact. My dad is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
So the last little bit there with the spaceship launch, you're actually, if you're playing the game, you can actually control the spaceship, and it's a bit of a challenge to get it to launch correctly. So one of the things we can see in this piece is talking about sort of the world of games. And so that's something that a lot of these things have in common, is sort of commenting on the actual medium of games themselves. And that's something that, is borrowed from the sort of modern art world. All right, so we're gonna look at game art. This is a slightly different thing. Let's check back in our game over here and see if it's running. I don't think it is. Anyway, you get the idea. It's Space Invaders, but you're shooting a text instead of actual aliens. All right, so game art is a little bit different in the sense that it's not interactive. It's art that is made with the medium of games. So a similar example to Mario Battle No One, this is another piece by the artist Corey Archangel that's not interactive. It's a video where he's taken a Mario cartridge and hacked out everything except the clouds. And so it's literally just a video of clouds moving pretty slowly across a blue-black background. And this is a work of video art. It just sits there. You know, it's not, you're not playing it or watching it like a movie. It's a visual artwork. So this is using a game, like it uses the actual technology of a game cartridge, to create a work of visual art that isn't actually a game. Another example, the work of Edo Stern does a lot of work with both video game content. So you can see he's created this sort of 3D face using a lot of references to different game and animation properties or works or whatever. And then he's using some text. He's animating a discussion about video games from a forum.
An atheist. Now on the subject of World of Warcraft and other games, I find that my father does not approve of this game at all. So I am asking, should I as a Christian who wants to stay in the light be playing World of Warcraft? He does not approve of this game because it has magic in it. It has demons in it. There are names that sound demonic. You can play as a warlock. He believes games have a spiritual side to them and that Satan will corrupt people in any form he can. And what would stop him from coming through a game?
So a lot of his video work uses this sort of the material of video games, both this kind of like commentary about games as well as the imagery of games to create this video piece. There we go. KoolAid Man in Second Life is an interesting piece. It's actually kind of an interview with the artist John Rathman.
Hey, KoolAid Man.
And a curator named Nicholas O'Brien. And the artist basically takes the curator on a tour of Second Life. And the artist has the avatar of KoolAid Man, and the curator has this person as an avatar, and they're kind of having this conversation about these virtual worlds as they're occupying different spaces in Second Life.
Art education, I guess you could say, but also your kind of the early part of your career, which is like invested in cinema and film history. And I'm wondering how that kind of education or that fascination or that interest or that part of your kind of early part of your career has like spilled over into kind of more recent work.
An underlying theme or goal is a constant search for artistic tools and methods that best represent or reveal modern experience. So I look for ideas and inspiration from those who also struggle to represent, their experience of modernity, whatever the time period or era. In fact, I believe that the different generations or time periods that have been termed modern are more similar than different. I mean, be it Chaucer.
Another example. Oh no, this video is gone. Let's see if it shows up if I go here. Okay, we'll have to search for this one. So this is by an artist named Ken Sheely, and they create video works that are just recordings from games. So this is Ready for Action grid number. Okay. So this is just a video work that shows different characters in this video game waiting for various forms of transportation. So waiting for the bus, waiting for the subway, waiting for the train. And it just kind of takes these long videos of them waiting in these spaces. And so it's, again, using the material of games, but using it to create a film or an artwork from that medium. And this is also kind of similar to Machinima, which is a similar idea, except instead of creating like a artwork with, with no narrative, these are sort of films that are made with game engines. The earliest example of this is Diary of a Camper, made with the Quake engine, and it's sort of telling the story of a guy who's waiting for a big battle, and they're kind of in this space anticipating this battle coming. So this was an influential piece in that it was the first film or a thing that was, sort of branding itself as a film that was made from a game, from just recording gameplay. A couple other examples of works like this: Karma Physics. This is a hacked game system to create this sort of goofy Elvis animation. And then a more narrative example on the next one.
In January of 2007, a man named Molotov Alva disappeared from his California home. Recently, a series of video dispatches by a traveler of the same name have appeared within a popular online world called Second Life. What follows is his story.
What you're watching right now is a diary I've kept to explain how I ended up living in this online world and why I left my straight world life behind. Socrates said, "The unexamined life."
Again, we see the source, sort of the game world, being used as a source to create a film with the narrative added to it. So from the MoMA shows, these are a bunch of different games that are recontextualized as art. So we looked at Pac-Man, and we can see what the MoMA sort of says about the design and interaction of these different games. And these are all actually really interesting games in various ways. I recommend checking these out. Vib Ribbon in particular is a game that I don't think a lot of people know about, but is a really interesting kind of art game. And then there's some other shows here that I linked to of just different sort of collections of curated game exhibitions. This one is gone, so let's see if we can find it. Hot Circuit. That didn't work. The video arcade. Like this has maybe disappeared from the website. I'll have to look for it later. I actually saw this show in person. It was a good. That's I'll have to find that later. Walker Art Museum. Oh, this is also good. Let's see. These sites are always incorrupt. Okay, I'll find that one. Here we go. Here's one that exists. So we can see some of the artists are listed here. Any image? Mass Mocha's game show from 2001. So we can see some of the games that we talked about in there. Smithsonian, Art of Video Games. There's some interesting stuff there. And then this was one of the first exhibitions, just a solo exhibition of a game designer's work. This is Jason Rohrer, and we saw his game Passage last week in the indie game section, and he had an opening just dedicated to his work and with all these different video games installed. So there's a few links there if you want to look into these projects a little bit more. I'll have to fix a couple of these links. I can do that later. But yeah, that's video games and art. So I'm going to stop recording for a second.